It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma. So says Joe Pesci's David Ferrie during a key scene in Oliver Stone's JFK, a movie that we're revisiting for a few key reasons. One is that Shout Factory just put out a 4K restoration that reissues both the director's cut and theatrical cuts of the films, but also due to the fact that director Oliver Stone, more than 30 years after the movie's release, is still utterly beguiled by the assassination. His recent documentary, JFK Through the Looking Glass, served as a bookend to the film, while another documentary, Citizen Stone, is in production and examines how the film in some ways served as his undoing, a notion I can't say I agree with. Whatever the case, JFK is a fascinating film that was one of the most provocative ones that came out in the 90s. A generation of us watched this film and became convinced that the US government had covered up and perhaps even participated in the JFK assassination. Stone himself described the film as counter-myth to the one established by the Warren Commission. By design, JFK asked questions rather than answered them, which perhaps was misunderstood when the movie initially came out, as they thought Stone was attempting to give definitive proof that a New Orleans businessman named Clay Shaw was intimately involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Rather, he's presenting a theory in this dramatization of New Orleans DA Jim Garrison's attempt to convict Shaw, which, to this day, remains the only trial to be brought forward involving the JFK assassination. But back to Oliver Stone. To understand the impact JFK had on the pop culture in 1991, you need some context for Stone's career at the time. Simply put, he was among the most controversial and acclaimed directors of his era. His films were good and they made money, something which gave him a tremendous amount of freedom. But he was also seen as something of America's conscience, with him making the movie Platoon, which helped the country reckon with the Vietnam War, while its quasi-follow-up, Born on the 4th of July, helped people do the same with the anti-war movement. In between those films, he made Salvador, which actually came out before Platoon, which exposed US involvement in the war in El Salvador, while Wall Street took a critical look at the Me generation and the way making money gave birth to the infamous sequel to the hippie generation, The Yuppie. Amazingly, JFK wasn't Stone's only movie in 1991, with him also directing The Doors. The JFK assassination is widely remarked on as the moment that America lost its innocence, even if that's a tremendously naive statement considering the country's history. But there is a line of dialogue in it that certainly resonated with a whole generation of Americans, where Kevin Costner's Jim Garrison calls us a generation of Hamlets and urges us not to forget our fallen king. Despite the controversy surrounding the film, seemingly every big star at the time wanted to be in it, with Kevin Costner at the peak of his fame, having won 2 Oscars for Dances with Wolves and having just topped the box office in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. He was seen as Mr. American Apple Pie at the time, so having him play Garrison was a potent choice. But many huge stars of the era were involved in this, with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, the famous Screen team, having separate roles, while John Candy played a Gantz type, as did Ed Asner, plus Tommy Lee Jones, Joe Pesci, Sissy Spacek, Kevin Bacon, and Donald Sutherland, all having other roles that were both big and small. To play the movie's Lee Harvey Oswald, who was presented as the ultimate patsy, Stone chose Gary Oldman. It all added up to a movie that generated a ton of press in 1991, but wasn't quite the box office smash that its reputation suggests. It crawled its way to a $70 million domestic gross, which is very good, and about $200 million worldwide. This is an enviable number for a 3-hour drama, but it wasn't necessarily a blockbuster. Warner Brothers claims that it lost money, in a great example of Hollywood accounting, meaning that Jim Garrison's family got nothing, which is kind of a shame because the film became a massive hit on home video, DVD, and cable, so certainly it at least broke even. Watching the movie now, it's easy to perhaps get caught up in the fury of the film, and I find that whenever I check it out, the 3.5-hour running time usually stretches out to at least 5 hours because I spend so much time Googling the various theories, such as the movie's dismissal of the single bullet theory. But here's the thing, for a movie that's virtually all talk and exposition, it's tremendously exciting. It's long, but it moves fast, and Stone's sense of pace is astounding. The cast is uniformly excellent, with Costner unusually erudite as the Shakespeare-quoting Garrison, while Tommy Lee Jones plays a Gantz type as Shaw, whose homosexuality many believe was presented somewhat exaggeratedly, with the infamous scene of Jones being dipped in gold, braying like a donkey, and inhaling poppers being one that's often singled out. But hey, amongst the cast, he was the only one to get an Oscar nomination. Joe Pesci is very good as the conscience-stricken David Ferrie, a co-conspirator, but the film is all but stolen by Donald Sutherland, a Canadian, ironically enough, in a powerhouse extended cameo as Mr. X, the government mole who explains the reasoning behind the assassination to Harrison in a bravura sequence. While the narrative now may be that the film killed Stone's career, that really wasn't so. Even if there were some famous rebuttals to his movie, such as the Quantum Leap episode where Scott Bakula's Sam leaps into Lee Harvey Oswald's body and finds his mind taken over, only to leap out seconds before he can actually foil the assassination. The conclusion of that show seemed to be that Oswald acted alone. While JFK was Stone's last significant hit, it was far from the last big movie he made. Natural Born Killers, Heaven on Earth, and Any Given Sunday all had massive budgets, as did his epic Alexander. Yet, they were far more extreme than his earlier films. Natural Born Killers, far more controversial than JFK ever was. Nonetheless, for years after those films, he was handed big budget. It's just that his movies became less successful over the years, with Stone himself becoming a polarizing figure. Yet JFK remains one of his essential works, and if it was the last time that he tapped into the zeitgeist, it was one heck of an accomplishment, which can't be denied, even if you happen to think that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. As for the 4K re-release, it's well worth picking up because you get both versions of the movie looking absolutely impeccable in 4K, and they've never looked or sounded better. It's almost like watching the movie in theaters in 1991 all over again, and I highly recommend it.